And certainly my seeing must be accurate because it's my experience. But if we hold judgments that are less than the truth about life, then we color every event that happens with those judgments. And we never get to see accurate evidence. And we never get to see and experience real living. It's not until we learn, and I'm probably going to say this until you maybe are tired of hearing it, until we learn the skill of forgiveness, the skill of being able to reach within ourselves and remove what doesn't belong there. My goodness, have you changed? And of course, you may proclaim, I haven't changed at all. But I know you have because, of course, my experience of you just changed. If we depend upon the mind and its experiences in life, no matter how real and valid they seem to be, we're depending on something that is false. We're depending on something that puts a coloring over everything. And once we put that coloring there, we perceive everything through it, and that forms and shapes our truth. It forms and shapes our experience. And then what happens is we start to experience things that never happened. Right now, I experience you all as being rather pink and red. And though I'm experiencing it, it never happened. We're somewhat like the child when we're in that position, who looks up at the clouds and he's gazing and watching all these wonderful figures, and all of a sudden this horrid monster forms before his eyes. And it inspires tremendous fear for him. And he runs off to the bedroom to hide under the bed because this monster is going to get him. His experience is real for him. His fear and his terror are real. If you try to get him out from under his bed, his bite is probably going to be real. But none of it's the truth. And when mankind is experiencing something less than what life is about, he's not experiencing the truth. And of course, I say mankind in the generic sense. We're not experiencing the truth when we experience through the colored glasses, when we experience through our beliefs about life, rather than experiencing life itself. So beneath the JS, the judgment system, lies the belief system. I like to call that the BS. And until we learn to take charge of our own JS, the only thing we ever get to see is evidence of our own BS. We need to wake up and move beyond that. Not only so that we get an accurate view of what life is about, but also that the energies that we put within us have a very profound influence right down to and including our physiology. When we recognize the power of our thoughts, the power of the energies that we put within this mind, we'll start to see the profound influence that has impacted our way of seeing the world. If we go to many of the different disciplines, we're going to find that in the last analysis, they're going to tell us that what we see in the world isn't even real. If we listen to Albert Einstein, for instance, Einstein makes the statement, what we have heretofore perceived as matter is not matter at all. What Einstein says is that matter is energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. And I quote him directly, there's no such thing. This basic discovery opened a whole new realm of science. And of course led to atomic power and the atomic bomb. What was at the root of that discovery? That matter and energy were interchangeable. That matter wasn't this solid, solidified, real thing that we thought it was. But it was a state of organized energy. Recognize that matter is a state of organized energy, And then you start to have the opportunity to come in touch with what it is that organizes it. What it is that sets matter into place and makes it so seemingly real and tangible. If we go back into the book of John in the New Testament, we'll find a statement made. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. Now, that's what we hear it said. The fact is, if you go back to the original language, again, the Aramaic, in which those words were originally spoken and the book was originally written, it doesn't say in the beginning was the Word and the Word became flesh. What it says is, in the beginning was the mind energy. And the mind energy became flesh and dwelt amongst us. Does that sound curiously like what Einstein said? That matter is energy reduced in its rate of vibration so as to be perceptible to the senses? He didn't take the next step into its mind energy, but that's exactly what he said. And we'll find many of the other disciplines saying the same thing. There's a gentleman named Harold Burr, who was a professor emeritus of anatomy at Yale University. And he did some 43 years of research on electrical energy fields around people, to the point where they were able to detect energy rates, vibratory fields that they had come to correlate with certain diseases before the diseases ever appeared in physical form. There's a book written by him by the title of Blueprint to Immortality. And when we recognize that it is these energy fields that set up what happens in the physical world, we'll have an opportunity to start to awaken and take charge of what happens in the level of mind energy. And any mind energy that we have put within this field that doesn't belong here, we'll have the opportunity to remove. When you recognize that the so-called body is really an energy system, and that the energy system simply reflects what is put into it, you get some idea of what really is going on in the so-called physical world. Relative to any integrated energy system, which is what the so-called body is, there are only two qualities of energy. There are those energies which disintegrate it or tear it down, and there are those energies which integrate it or build it up. The integrative and the disintegrative. The integrative energies, when engaged in the level of mind energy, are what set up the condition called health. On the other hand, the disintegrative energies are the ones that create the condition that we call disease. And you'll remember that that word disease is dis-ease. And we always introduce our dis-eases in the realm of mind energy. And when we will become willing to look into our minds at the energies that we've put there, the ones that don't belong there, and remove them, we will find ourselves going back to a condition of ease and a condition of health. The fact is, there is only one cause of disease. Oh yes, the ego's game, the ego's world plays all this stuff about all these multitudinous causes, all the bugs, all the buzzards, all the little critters that can kill us. But the fact is, those critters have nothing whatsoever to do with disease. The fact is, the mind functions through every cell in the body. When I talk about a brain cell, I'm talking about the capability of every cell in the body to function as a storage unit for information. And when we put information into tissue that doesn't belong there, we have violated tissue integrity. And that specific tissue will start to decay. And all the things that we have attributed cause to, the bugs, the buzzard, the virus, the bacteria, are not cause at all. They're simply an effect of the disease process. And the disease that ends up being our flesh always starts in the realm of mind energy. Wherever we store it, the tissue literally starts to decay. And when tissue starts to decay, it's been provided that there's always a cleanup crew. Let's imagine that I went outside into the grass and I roped off a square foot and I counted how many little bugs and creepy crawly things, ants and so on, were there. And then I looked up in the sky and I counted how many buzzards and flying critters there were overhead. Probably wouldn't have very many, would I? However, if I took a dead rabbit and put it out in that 1 square foot of grass, and it's 80 degrees out like it is today, would you suppose that the count of those creepy, crawly things and things flying overhead would have elevated at all in 48 hours? Quite likely. Why? Because it's been provided that where decay is happening, there's a cleanup crew. Thinking that if we kill off the virus or the bacteria in the body that causes the disease is about as primitive as thinking that if we go and shoot the buzzards and kill all the bugs, the rabbit's coming back to life. And it's not. It's not because they did not cause the disease process in the first place. In our wish not to be responsible for ourselves and be responsible for our lives, we've denied that we have anything to do with the disease process. Oh, well, I just fell subject to that something out there. And when we start to deny, what we do with our denial is we suppress awareness of the mind energy with which we've set up that disease process. As we deny, we suppress. And when we suppress it, what we've done is we've said to the JS, to the judgment system, I don't want to know that I've got anything to do with this. Hide it. Get rid of it. And so it becomes invisible in our evidential mind. It becomes invisible in the evidential computer. Even if something comes along that says and proves to you you're responsible, the brain chemistry that causes brain cell function to be suppressed will keep that information out of your awareness. And it's not until you're willing to look at that and remove those blocks in blockage of personal error that you will ever get to see your responsibility and therefore ever get to truly heal. Because when we put that mind energy into tissue, the tissue starts to disintegrate and fall apart. The cleanup crew comes along in order that the whole system doesn't become toxified. When we remove the energy that doesn't belong there, the natural recuperative powers of the body will go back to work and rebuild it. And in rebuilding it, we have the opportunity to take charge of this energy system and bring it back to life. To put something less than our true nature and our true character into this system is what was called defiling the temple. What is our true nature? The human being's true nature is love. Love isn't something we need to go out and find a definition for. It's what we are. And anything less than love that we hide away in this energy system causes it to start to disintegrate. We have defiled the temple with it. Forgiveness is the opportunity to remove from the device that which doesn't belong there. And it naturally rebuilds itself. It automatically rebuilds itself. But there is one thing that has to happen first. We must acquire the skill of forgiveness. We must acquire the skill that allows us to reach into this system and remove what doesn't belong there. Most of us, because of the way we've been formed, the way we've been trained, have got an iron-tight grip on our belief system, and we're not about to change it. Forgiveness is the skill with which you reach in and bring about those changes. There's some interesting things happening in the field of medical research, and one thing that I find really incredible to look at that documents what we're talking about is what's happening in the field of multiple personality research. When you start to understand that this tremendous accumulation of mind energy is what organizes our physiological system, then you recognize that energies that don't belong there disorganize it. And that we all have a sort of a solidified image of who we are. We've got a packet of mind energy that says, this is who I am. And that solidified mind energy forms what we call the personality. The word personality comes from the Greek persona, which means mask. It's the mask that we put on over who we are. And this gigantic, and in our next session we'll talk about how massive this thought system is, this gigantic thought system keeps us locked into this personality, this persona. And as long as we hold it, that is the predominant persona is the thing that governs the way our physiology is organized. Because it is exactly what it is that organizes it and keeps it in the condition it's in. Now, in the field of personality, multiple personality research, and in particular, there's some research by a gentleman named Braun, and what he found was, and he took a woman who had what we all know to be, of course, a real, incurable physical disease called diabetes, right? I mean, we know that's not curable, especially advanced diabetes. Dr. Braun took a subject into the laboratory, had her all hooked up totally. This is someone that's known to go through personality changes, multiple personalities, which would just mean that one personality, one persona governs and rules, or another one does, or perhaps still another and another. The number of different personalities seems to correlate directly with events that happen in early life. Most people who exhibit multiple personality syndrome are people who have been through many different forms of abuse, be they physical, emotional, sexual, whatever they are. And they seem to form a personality, a persona, to handle each different form of abuse. Now, the interesting thing that happened is he hooks her up to the electrode. She's got the real physical disease, diabetes. And then she goes through a personality change. And that instantly, there is not a trace of diabetes in her body. It's gone. And as long as she remains in that second personality, and we would define a second personality as a personality that is different from the one that normally governs us. When she flips back into her original personality, the diabetes is back. The physiological shift happens. Now, in order to change personalities, we have a massive shift in mind energy. And that massive shift means there's a massive shift in what organizes our physiology, and therefore changes our disease processes. Now, what is it that creates our disease processes? What are the qualities of mind energy that do that? Well, there's some interesting research by a cardiologist named Herbert Benson, who wrote a book called The Relaxation Response. And I'm told, although I've not heard this directly from Dr. Benson, that the experiment he carried out he would not repeat because of the results that happened. Of course, he couldn't do it with humans, so he found an animal that was similar to humans in their mating habits, a baboon, where the baboon has similar habits to the human, long-term relationships, sometimes lifetime relationships. And he took a mated pair of young, healthy baboons, and a young, healthy baboon would never exhibit signs of heart disorders in the normal condition in the wild. And he took them into a laboratory, and he separated them into two cages. The male in one cage, the female in another. Remember, these are a mated pair. And then they brought a second male in and put him in the cage with the female. Now, you can imagine the human correlation of the emotions and the feelings and the thoughts and the mind energy that this mated baboon would go through. It took 2 weeks. It may have been 3, if I remember correctly. 3 weeks, I believe it was, for the young, healthy male baboon in the laboratory to exhibit the symptoms of what would be considered incurable high blood pressure. And in 3 months, it was dead of heart disease. Now think in human terms how much of that type of emotion, how much of that type of rage, how much of that type of fear, how much of that kind of upset do we put in on a daily basis? Oh yes, it's not as short a time period that we destroy the body, because we're not usually in quite that intense a situation. But if you go into a very intense situation, for instance, in at least 50% of people who die of snake bites, when they do an autopsy, it's not enough venom to produce death. Is it an intense, disintegrative emotion that causes death? In battle, unwounded, a man lies dead. I also understand on autopsy, some 50% of people who drowned don't have enough water in their lungs to have drowned. So the more we intensify the disintegrative energy, the more destructive its effect is. And every cell in this body has the power and the ability to retain that information. Nothing is ever forgotten in the system. However, when we wake up to who we are, we do have the ability to reach into the system and cancel or let loose of the mind energy that doesn't belong there. If we look at the body, what we're looking at is an effect. We're not looking at the real thing. Remember, matter doesn't exist. It's energy reduced in its rate of vibration. What Dr. Burr said from Yale was that the energy field, and let me make sure that I quote him properly, L fields, he calls them, are the basic blueprints of life. And the L field is the field that we set in place with mind energy. Again, to the book of John. In the beginning is the mind energy. Could it be that they were talking about exactly the same thing? Burr, Einstein, John in the New Testament, talking about the influence that our own thoughts and our own feelings have upon the physiological organization of the thing that we call matter. We're looking at a screen, we're looking at an effect, we're looking at a result when we look at the body. What happens when you try to treat a result as a cause? Let's imagine that we took someone primitive out of the jungles and we had a picture shining on a movie screen. And the picture is a picture of a table. And on the table there's a bottle. And let's imagine that we invite this primitive to move the bottle from one side of the screen to the other. And let's imagine that we offer him, whatever would be his greatest reward, his highest aspiration and dream in life is his if he can just move the bottle. How long do you think he might work at trying to pick the bottle up off of the screen and move it over? Might he, when we offer him a jackhammer, a set of tools, cut a hole in the wall and try to move the piece of wall over? What kind of gyrations might he go through and yet be totally unsuccessful because I don't care what he does with the effect, the bottle isn't going to move. Now the person who comes in and understands that there's a projector back there and that the projector has a signal feeding into it from a camera and the camera's trained on a table, the person who walks into the room while the primitive is trying to get it to change goes into the little back room and moves the bottle on the table and comes back out and says, "There, I did it for you." What do you suppose that primitive is going to think of this person? I think they're pretty magnificent, especially if he's just spent 6 months trying to figure out how to do it. He's going to call this person a miracle worker. The person who understands the elephant is called a miracle worker. Not because they work miracles, but because they understand how the system, they have knowledge, they understand how the system functions. They know where the little room is, they know where the cause is. And they're not confused about what level it happens on. When we look at the body and we think that something's happened on the physical level, and we try to change it on the physical level, we're acting in a very primitive fashion. Now, this may be a new idea, and in fact, an idea that will be scorned by many. As you might imagine, the fellow in the cave times, who, as he thought about this luscious fruit he was eating, this tomato, he picked up this little white thing and decided, I think this is where tomatoes come from. Now, can you imagine as he goes out to everybody in the tribe and says, hey, look what I've got. I'm going to call this a seed, and it's going to grow tomatoes right here. Now, you can imagine all the townsfolk kind of looking, old Charlie's flipped his wig. But lo and behold, tomatoes grew. Well, most of humanity is at the stage called primitive. They don't know what a seed is yet. And most of us on the level of mind energy intercourse with many, many types of energy that don't belong in the system. We open ourselves and indiscriminately interact. And then, when we give birth to the product of that interaction, when we give birth to an experience, we say, gee, I wonder who the father was. Of course, I had nothing to do with this. And the very refusal that keeps them from seeing the evidence of their participation is the thing that keeps them locked into and condemned to repeating the experience over and over and over again. When we will start to wake up to who we are and recognize the power that our mind energy has, not only in our own system, and in the next segment we'll get into what it is that happens in the world as a result of that. It's a very powerful effect. And as we wake up, we can start to recognize years and years and years before we end up with physical disease. The first stage of putting energy into the system that doesn't belong there is called functional disease. Part of the body just doesn't function right, but it doesn't matter how many tests you do, we can't find out what's wrong. When we wake up and we start to recognize and remove the energies that don't belong there, then the body can go back to a condition called health. We don't have to wait for 20 years to show up for it to show up as something physical, because then it's 20 years too late. Oh yes, it can still be undone, but not nearly so easily as when we're back at the level where it occurred in the first place. And I'd like to sum up everything that I've said in this segment in a poem that I think says it very well. And the poem is called Each Moment. Each moment of love, each moment of giving, each moment of joy is a moment of living. Each moment of anger, each moment of lying, each moment of fear is a moment of dying. All our moments add together like the digits in a sum, and the answer tells us plainly whether life or death shall come. In the first section, we talked about blockage of personal error and a few of the effects